When it comes to presenting evidence-based arguments that attempt to prove the existence of God, there is perhaps no more popular category of argument than the teleological arguments, otherwise known as the argument from design. And whether this is presented in the format of look at the trees, or the tide goes in, tide goes out, never a miscommunication, or simply you just can't explain this particular feature of reality without appealing to a God, this argument is quite literally everywhere. The arguments from design are so common and varied that we're going to actually have to divide this video up into two separate videos. In the second one, tentatively called What Are the Odds?, we'll take a look at the modern intelligent design movement's claims regarding fine-tuning and probability, or more accurately, improbability, that lead them to the conclusion that the best explanation for the curious facts of the universe that surround us is that there's an intelligent designer behind it all. In this video, though, we're going to take a look at the origins of the arguments from design and some of the common versions presented by, let's say, less refined apologists that focus on the appearance of purpose and order and the well-oiled functioning machine that is the universe that we inhabit. So what is this argument from design all about? For as long as we've been able to think, it seems likely that we've considered our origins and our place in reality. When I look around at this world that I inhabit, why does it seem that it's so tweaked and designed, especially for me? The gravity's just right, the oxygen's just right, there's access to food and shelter and water. Everything I look at when I look around me seems to be designed with me in mind. And our ancient ancestors who considered this question of how we came to be here and how the world came to be and why it seems to be designed for us, had this perception in mind, and they also had a very limited understanding of the cosmos. They didn't travel too far from their home. Their understanding of other areas of the earth came primarily from traveling mariners and adventurers who brought tales from other lands, and so they had hearsay accounts. But they understood, we're on Earth, and there's a moon, and there's a sun, and there's some stars in the sky, and that was the limit of their understanding of the cosmos. And it seems almost reasonable that they would conclude that they were the purpose for which all of this was created. Why then, when we begin to understand more about the cosmos and we begin to understand our actual insignificance at the cosmic scale, doesn't the argument design just evaporate? And it seems to me that if you begin with the idea that the universe is designed for you, then the more universe you find, the more it's going to be viewed in that perspective. And everything's going to merge together to meet your foregone conclusion. But is that really the case? As we look around at the universe, does it really appear designed for us? Or is this just an arrogant presumption on our part? Let's take a look at what Thomas Aquinas had to say in his fifth way for demonstrating the truth that God exists. His version of the teleological argument, the argument from design. The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world. We see that things which lack intelligence, such as natural bodies, act for an end, and this is evident from their acting always or nearly always in the same way so as to obtain the best result. Hence it is plain that not fortuitously but designedly do they achieve their end. Now whatever lacks intelligence cannot move towards an end, unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. Therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God. So Aquinas' argument is essentially, here are a bunch of things that are unthinking, and they are evidently moving towards a goal or a purpose. And unthinking things cannot move themselves toward a goal or purpose. This is the purview of thinking agents, and therefore there must be some thinking agent that is causing these unthinking things to move towards their goal or purpose. And there are a number of problems with what Aquinas says here. He begins with this idea of governance and says that his fifth way is taken from the governance of the world, which, as far as I can tell, automatically smuggles in the idea of a governor. But it's worse than that because Aquinas doesn't give us specific examples. He speaks only in the abstract. And he also uses weaselly languages, saying it's evident that these unthinking things are moving towards a goal or moving with a purpose. And then he says that it's plain that unthinking things can't do this, and only thinking things can, therefore a thinking thing is doing it on behalf of the unthinking things. This is a bit of equivocation here. It's a bit of a cheat. Because while it's probably fair to say that it's plain that unthinking things cannot move towards a goal of their own, and that thinking things can, it is not evident, as he claims, that they are in fact moving towards a goal. He offers no evidence, he offers no argument that these unthinking things are moving toward a goal or a purpose. He uses the Weasley language of, it's just evident. He watches them get to the goal or the purpose and then concludes that this is where they were intended to arrive. At every corner, he is smuggling in intent in order to make his argument that there must in fact be a designer. When an argument attempts to back up its claims with statements like, isn't it obvious, or it's plain, or it's evident, or clearly, we need to be extra diligent about analyzing those claims to see if they are in fact obvious and evident and clear. How did Aquinas determine that there was intent, that there was a goal, that there was a purpose that these unthinking things were moving towards? He doesn't tell us. He doesn't even give specific examples. He speaks merely in the abstract and asserts that it's obvious that they're moving towards a goal. Is it obvious? How do we go about recognizing design? What are the features of an intentionally designed object or system that allow us to recognize that it is in fact design? Let's take a look at that.
This tree perfectly illustrates one of the problems with the argument from design. It's growing right out of the rock face, an inhospitable location. Its roots find their way through the cracks in order to get the nutrients that the tree needs. When advocates of the design argument look at the world and they see a beautiful tree and lush soil next to a pond, it appears that the environment was designed to fit the tree. And when they see a tree like this, it appears that the tree was designed so that it could exploit environments that weren't specifically designed for it. By allowing perceived design to be the foundation, they've constructed a win-win scenario for design, which might explain why they tend to see design everywhere.
So how do we recognize design? How do we tell what's designed and what isn't? When you listen to people talk about this, when apologists engage, they sometimes want to step right over this critical aspect of how we determine what is and isn't design. They want to exploit the intuitions and inferences we make. A building requires a builder, a painting requires a painter, creation requires a creator. And I agree with them on all points. The question is, how did you determine that it was in fact a building? How did you determine that it was in fact a painting? And how did you determine that it was in fact creation? When we're talking about the universe, labeling it creation in order to claim that there's a creator is a dishonest apologetic. It is a circular argument where you are injecting the very thing you're trying to prove in right at the beginning. The truth is that we recognize design by contrasting it with that which naturally occurs. And when someone says, this had to have been designed, or this must have been designed, or this has almost certainly been designed, what they're saying is, it is not possible or not probable for this particular set of circumstances to come about by natural means. And the first question we have to ask is, how did you determine that? So it's important for us to recognize how we go about determining that something is designed. Because by and large in our daily lives, we live by inference and induction. Today is pretty much the same as yesterday. This building over here is pretty much the same as that building over there. And the wealth of information that we have points to the conclusion that a building, the thing we identify as a building, is actually a construct of an intelligent agent and doesn't come about naturally. It's not about the complexity of the building. Some would say that the hallmark of design, intelligent design and good design, is not complexity, but simplicity. Having just enough complexity to accomplish the goal. And so the questions that we have to ask ourselves are things like, do we know of any natural mechanisms that can account for this? Do we know of any intelligent agents that could account for this? Do we have examples of this type of thing being constructed intelligently? Do we have examples of this type of thing occurring naturally? And when we evaluate those things, it's not just a matter of saying, oh, this thing is clearly designed and we have evidence for it, and this other thing is kind of like it, so we'll just go ahead and say it's designed too. Design needs to be demonstrated. You can't just argue from analogy that, oh, this structure over here is clearly designed, so this thing that looks like a structure is also designed. How do you tell the difference between a bundle of sticks blocking up a river after a flood and a beaver dam? from some perspective, they look very much the same. And the answer is that you go in and investigate, and you see where the beavers have done work, and you see their paw prints, and you see the packing of the mud and the weaving of the branches in order to construct this. And you compare this to other beaver dams, things that you've witnessed a beaver constructing, and then you can reach the conclusion reasonably that this thing is so similar to this other thing for which we have direct observational evidence of intelligent design that it is most probably the result of intelligent design. So some of the originators of the design argument saw order and purpose everywhere in the world. But you can find order and purpose even where it doesn't appear that there actually is any. If you find a rock that is flat and smooth, was it designed for skipping? If you find a rock that's just dense enough and heavy enough, was it designed to be a hammer just because we can use it as a hammer? How do you determine what the intent is? And if there was any intent at all? Perhaps the most popular and common version of the design argument is William Paley's watchmaker analogy. And it simply expresses the idea that if you're walking along a beach and you find a watch, you pick it up and you immediately recognize that this is a watch. It has complexity, it has design, it was clearly designed for a purpose. And he translates this to seeing the same sort of design and purpose in nature as well. Well, how did he determine that it was a watch? This is where we get back to exploiting our laziness in thinking about how we determine. How did he determine that it was a watch? Oh, because he has mountains of evidence of this particular object that he's holding is a designed watch for a purpose, and no evidence to support the idea that it could occur naturally. And yet, when you extend this analogy to the universe, now you're talking about the natural world. You're talking about things that do occur naturally. What's worse is that the people who tend to use Paley's watchmaker believe that God, in fact, designed and created everything. And if that's the case, then there can be no contrast between what is designed and what's not designed, because everything's designed. And you're walking along a beach full of watches, in a universe full of watches, and you yourself are a watch. At that point, you can no longer pick up this specific watch and say that it has the clear hallmarks of design if your worldview has it that everything is designed, from the grain of sand to the entire universe. Sir Isaac Newton accepted the argument for design and had a view of it that was similar to Thomas Aquinas's, because Aquinas mentions this idea of governance. And Newton's view of the argument from design was that God designed the universe, but he also consistently intervenes to manage it as a governor, sustaining it. Leibniz looked at Newton's argument and said, well, that doesn't seem right. Clearly, Newton's God didn't have the foresight to create a universe with perpetual motion. He has to keep coming in and winding his watch. Is Newton's God essentially so weak that he couldn't have designed a universe that didn't need his constant tinkering? And even one of my heroes, David Hume, initially accepted the argument from design, but in his later works, it becomes a little more critical of design and begins to talk about the possibility of bad design, suggesting that maybe this universe is some infant deity's first attempt at design, which would explain the wastefulness and the bad design. So let's go ahead and say, for the sake of argument, that we've determined that the universe that we inhabit does in fact need a designer, and that this designer cannot be nature, because design is recognized by contrasting it with nature. And when we say this, we're taking, for the sake of argument, that there needs to be an intelligent, intentional, creative agent who set about to create the universe that we inhabit. Apart from that, what do we know about this intelligent agent? Does it love? Does it want? Does it need something from us? Did it design us for a purpose? What is the purpose of humans? For all those people proposing order and purpose in the universe, the question then becomes, if the universe was designed purposefully to fit us, what were we designed for? And many theologians will give you the answer that our purpose is to love and worship God. How did they reach that conclusion? How did they determine anything else about this creative force? How do they even know that it still exists? Is it not possible that a creative force that wasn't in fact omnipotent but was merely powerful enough, created the entire universe as a single last death throes creative act and then ceased to exist. If that's the case, and if it's at least possible, then it makes no difference whether or not the universe was designed, because the designer's not around to talk to about why he designed or how he designed.
There are within the design arguments almost as many fallacies as there are versions of design arguments. Seeing design in the motion of the planets, but not in a falling apple, is special pleading founded on a misunderstanding of the nature of gravity. There are failed analogies and equivocation fallacies when comparing known design in the cases of watches and buildings with perceived design in the workings of the universe. The proposed explanation for the unknown workings of the universe amount to nothing more than assertions and magical thinking. As we've also seen, some versions of the argument are ultimately circular, by beginning with an assertion of goals and purposes which would require intent as the premises. They've essentially smuggled in the idea that there must be some intelligence guiding this, and then they claim that that mind is God, and usually it's the God of the person making the argument. Christians and Muslims, for example, each have their own versions of the design argument to support their own notions of God. And while this should be an obvious sign that there's a problem, the argument hasn't led us to a single specific explanation, many would cite this as confirmation of the argument's strength. Clearly, if many independent religions have reached this conclusion, it must be correct, and there must be a God, even if that other group managed to get the specifics about that God wrong. The truth, though, is that the God hypothesis has no explanatory power. We explain things in terms of other things that we understand. As an all-powerful being, God is equivalent to a panacea, a cure-all, which can be proposed as an answer to everything and an explanation for nothing. Asserting God as the causal explanation for unknown processes in nature slows or halts all progress toward an actual explanation. It appears that our arrogance knows no bounds when looking at the universe and feeling that it was all created especially for us. Our arrogance and a need to feel special has resulted in a sort of causal inversion. We see the appearance of design, order, and purpose, and presume that it was all specifically created for us, that we were the intent of the universe. What about the possibility that the universe wasn't designed for us, but that we are merely the result of the universe we inhabit? That we're just the sort of thing that this particular universe results in, without intentional or intelligent guidance? This is the strength of Darwin's theory of evolution by means of natural selection, which demonstrates that the complex appearance of design isn't governed by intent or foresight, but by natural laws moving without a plan. Does that mean it's merely an accident? Well, no. Natural selection isn't synonymous with accident, and it's not mere chance. It's the application of ordered laws to a dynamic environment. And as Darwin gave us the explanation for the appearance of design in biology, cosmologists and physicists have begun to offer natural explanations for the appearance of design and order in the physical universe as well. But even if we had no explanation, that doesn't mean that we'd be justified in reaching the conclusion that there's an intelligence behind this perceived order. The design arguments might have a bit more merit if there was only the Earth, or more accurately, only a small portion of the Earth. Or more accurately, if we found ourselves in an idyllic scenario specifically suited to our existence that had no natural explanation. But that's not the universe that we find ourselves in. Our planet, solar system, and even our galaxy represent just a tiny, relatively insignificant part of the universe, which may represent an insignificant part of the cosmos or multiverse. But even within the boundaries we know of, we're cosmically insignificant. Putting it in perspective, claiming that the universe was clearly designed for me is a bit like claiming that I was clearly designed for a specific neutrino to pass through. While there have been many responses to the argument from design, one of my favorites comes from author Douglas Adams. This is rather as if you imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, "This is an interesting world I find myself in. An interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have been made to have me in it. This is such a powerful idea that as the sun rises in the sky and the air heats up, and as gradually the puddle gets smaller and smaller, frantically hanging on to the notion that everything's going to be all right, because this world was meant to have him in it, was built to have him in it, so the moment he disappears catches him rather by surprise. I think this may be something we need to be on the watch out for. It seems as if our desire to feel important and special has encouraged us to see ourselves this way in every regard. Some fear that our relative insignificance from the perspective of the cosmos makes us somehow less special. And as our understanding of the universe expands, our role in it shrinks from that perspective. But why should that be the perspective from which we evaluate ourselves and our significance? Is our trip to the moon less significant merely because the moon appears to be virtually touching us when viewed from outside of our galaxy? We're special to us from our perspective. Why shouldn't that be enough? And isn't it far more special from our perspective to value truth, investigation, and discovery about the real facts of our universe than to reach the wrong conclusions or accept unfounded assertions that seek to elevate us merely because we don't like the possibility that we might be insignificant from another perspective? The foundations of the argument from design are firmly rooted in simply asserting that if a thing appears to be designed, then it was in fact designed, and then going on to claim special information about that designer. In part 2 of this video, called What Are the Odds?, we'll take a look at the more nuanced attempts to actually demonstrate design by considering the apparent fine-tuning of the universe and calculating the odds that such a scenario could have come about by natural causes. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support by visiting patreon.com/atheistdebates.